bell ringer today, I talked with Mrs. Matthews and maybe.
Oh, you have to click on this line. If you click out of the window, that's the
I talked with Mrs. Matthews and Miss Mortimer, and we thought that rebuttals and counterclaims are kind of a point that middle school students struggle with. They don't really see the connection between them. So for our bell ringer today, I want you to choose one of the claims that you agree with below, just one claim, and with that you're gonna write a counterclaim and rebuttal to strengthen your argument. And this is just a segue into what my lesson is gonna be before we give you the time to actually work on your counterclaim and your rebuttal today. Do I have any questions, comments, or concerns before I start the timer? This is also a really good point or a really good time if you're not sure. We did take those lessons at the beginning of the trimester on claims, counterclaims, and rebuttals. So if you need to refer back to those right now, this is a perfect time. Yes, I would write down what claim you choose so that when I'm going back and I'm grading your bell ringer, I know which one you're writing a counterclaim to and a rebuttal to. If your group member, or if your group role within your group is to write the counterclaim or the rebuttal, this is a really good time for you to try your best and get some feedback on it and see how you can improve writing your counterclaim and writing your rebuttal on the actual paper. About a minute left to wrap up your thoughts. And I'm gonna give you about a minute in your groups or turn to a partner or neighbor nearby to discuss and get a little bit of feedback before we're ready to share with the class. Okay, I'm gonna give us about 1 minute to either wrap up your thoughts and make sure that you have that counterclaim written and rebuttal, or if you need the time to share with a partner, maybe get a little bit of feedback and see what they're thinking, what they wrote, how it's different to yours, how it might be the same as yours. If you chose different claims.
For my chemistry rebuttal, I chose number 2, because I agree with everything that I wrote. You might think that, okay, you might think that was cross marked, but if they were just same size yours, it should have.
Is that the same as yours or different?
And then I wrote, I do not know what to write. Oh, but know what else to write. So here's home, and I started home, but it didn't finish.
Okay, I just want to see a raise of hands as I go through each claim just to kind of get a head count for who chose each claim. So claim number 1, raise your hand if you chose that and responded to it. Okay, what about claim number 2? Only 3 of us? 4 of us? 5? Okay. Claim number 3. 3 of us. Awesome. Okay. I don't want everyone to feel like they have to share, but I would really like this to be a useful segue into our lesson. So for claim number 1, who can tell me what counterclaim they wrote for that claim? Yes.
I said that I agree with the statement because it is important to know if something happened at home or if your family got into a crash or anything that's of importance like that.
Okay, so what's a good counterclaim? What's somebody gonna possibly argue against that? And we kind of had practice with this yesterday with the Would You Rather Wednesday prompt. What would somebody try to argue against that to shoot that claim down?
I said that they would probably think that it would be a distraction and make them pay less attention in class.
Right, so that directly goes against the claim. It is trying to shoot it down and refute it and make it seem less believable, right? So middle school students should have access to their phones during school hours in case of emergencies, but somebody could argue if students were able to have access to their phones during school hours, it would just cause a lot more distractions in class and students wouldn't be paying attention or on task, right? That's a great counterclaim. So then what would a rebuttal be to that specific counterclaim? Yes.
I said that they wouldn't care so much to be on their phones like right after school. Some kids are just on their phones just to like break the rules or to like do something else. But if they're allowed on it, then they might not like be motivated to be on it as much.
Right, it might not be as much of a temptation.
Also like some kids get on their phone right after school and then they're like on their phone all day. But like if you always access to it, they won't like get right on it, and like then it could also help them like not be on it as late at night when they're gonna sleep.
Right, so do you see how with that rebuttal, she goes back to the claim and strengthens her claim by shooting down the rebuttal? She says, well, some people might say this, it might actually be less of a distraction and less of a temptation if they do have access to it during school hours, right? Okay, claim number 2. Does anyone want to share their counterclaim? Maddie?
I said, although So my said although some 13-year-olds get distracted easily.
So you said although some students or some 13-year-olds might get distracted easily if we do that, right? So the claim is Idaho should lower the legal driving age to 13 so students can drive themselves to school and extracurricular activities. Maddie says a really good counterclaim for that is if they're so young and they're 13, they might get distracted easily and more easy than 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds, right? That have a little bit more maturity. Vivian.
Rebuttal could be that if they have the same training as high schoolers, then they would also have the same skills and be able to drive the same.
Right, so again, do you see how Vivian so we have the claim, Maddie gave the counterclaim, and then Vivian shot down the counterclaim with her rebuttal that strengthens our argument. Because she's saying, well, if 13-year-olds get the same kind of rigorous training and they're going through the same driving school, everything like that, then it shouldn't really be a problem and they shouldn't have the same, or they shouldn't have more distractions, right? That is a beautiful example of another counterclaim. Claim number 3, all middle school students should be required to participate in team sports to promote teamwork. Finn.
The counterclaim I put is schools already promote teamwork with group work in normal classes.
Right? I thought another point to add would be even in PE. How many of us have PE and there's teamwork activities in PE, right? So Finn says school students should not be required to participate in team sports because collaboration and teamwork are already a part of school and even PE, right? So that's a very good counterclaim. Do you want to add a rebuttal, Tatum?
Sure.
Or do you want to offer your own counterclaim?
I'll do that. If you're just in PE, then the team are usually split up with people that you know or that you really work with, so it's kind of you don't talk to people as much and you don't really work as a team sometimes, and it's just one person who knows how to do a sport or something. And a team that's actually trying, and so then you're not really working as a team and you're not really learning teamwork and you're just there to have fun.
Right.
Which is good, but still you're not learning any teamwork and
So by saying that, do you think that if schools were requiring all students to be participating in team sports, that would do a better job of building that teamwork, right, and collaboration than PE would? Yes. I'm gonna go Piper and then back to Finn.
It's just that some kids have those after school still, when they get sports are sometimes expensive to buy the gear and to pay the participation fees.
So Piper just said she made a really good point in her counterclaim. So while there could be benefits to teamwork and team sports, a lot of parents can't afford all the fees that go with it and all of the gear that goes with it and the shoes and the knee pads and the helmets and everything, right? So that's a really good counterclaim. Does anyone want to offer a rebuttal to that counterclaim? Vivian?
That maybe the school could provide the, you would have to purchase your own if you're going to keep it, but you could just use it during the extracurricular activities for no charge.
Right, again, so see how Vivian uses her rebuttal, she connects it to the counterclaim to shoot down the counterclaim and still kind of connects it back to the claim. So while there are fees and stuff connected to it, Vivian says that schools could just rent out the equipment, right? And that way the student or the parents aren't having to pay all the fees. What's another option? Fundraising for those fees, right? I don't know if you guys sell cookie dough or anything like that. When I was in middle school, that's one of the ways that we could fundraise if we wanted to play sports, is we sold so many boxes or bags of cookie dough that we could then participate without having to pay the fees because they were covered by our fundraising. Finn, one last comment to wrap us up.
And the rebuttal that I put, it would also be useful for exercise, because PE in middle school you only get one try. You can get more exercise, which can promote more physical health, and you can be a lot more healthy physically.
Right, so again, Finn just offered up his rebuttal, and it kind of shoots down that counterclaim that he gave earlier, and it's strengthening our claim by saying, well, there might be some disadvantages, or some parents that might not be able to pay, or some students that might not want to be in team sports. There's a lot of advantages and pros that outweigh the cons, right? Okay, we're gonna transition into taking a little bit of notes, and a lot of them, or some of them kind of seem redundant. So we have already taken notes on what claims are and counterclaims. I'm just giving us a little bit of a review. So if you don't have these in your notes and you're in charge of writing the counterclaim or the rebuttal, this is a really good chance for you to make sure you're getting those notes. So you know that when it's time for you to write your body paragraph number 4 or 5, that you're all set, ready to go, you have your notes, and you're confident in your ability, right? So a claim, which we've already kind of talked about, we have the examples on the board, is your stance or overall argument. So it's what you are arguing. So in terms of this essay that we're writing on Alcatraz, there's really only 2 claims. It's that they had a successful escape, or that they failed at escaping, right? Now your counterclaims, because we're in groups and we might not all have agreed on what the claim should be and what we have more evidence for, that's kind of where the one person stands up and says, well, I think that there's more evidence for this, so that's why you're probably in charge of writing the counterclaim paragraph, body paragraph number 4, right? So a counterclaim is a claim that disagrees or tries to disprove the claim, so the opposite view. And this is a really good point too. I write this down. If you are writing the counterclaim, or maybe this doesn't make sense to you, your counterclaim should connect to details mentioned earlier in the essay. So like all the examples that we just went over, all of the counterclaims are directly related to the claims. And it's kind of unique because within this book that we read and this kind of unit that we're doing, the evidence can either be for a successful escape or it can be against a successful escape, right? Because we don't know the definitive answer whether they were successful or not. We just have the evidence. So then in your counterclaim, if you talked about the raft that was found near Angel Island, and everybody else in the body paragraph number 1 or 2 says that that shows that they were successful in their attempt because they made it off in one piece and the raft was left there, so they made it to Angel Island and another boat picked them up. That is evidence for your claim, right? But then somebody in the counterclaim could say, connecting to those details, well, if they only found the raft and no life jackets nearby or any other personal items of the prisoners, that is actually evidence that they did not escape, right? Does that make sense? Little thumbs up if you understand. Okay, and I would also suggest writing down these common phrases that help you with transitioning into your counterclaim. So this is just an example that I wrote down. You don't have to write down the entire example if you don't want to, but if you think it would be useful for modeling years after, I would absolutely write it down. So some counterclaim transitional phrases that are often used are some people claim that, or in contrast, on the contrary, or on the other hand, right? So this is just my example. Some people claim that it wasn't the Anglin brothers that showed up to their mother's funeral in disguises. Instead, it was just 2 family friends, right? So even if this isn't your job or your role within your group to write the counterclaim, I would still suggest taking notes, so then if that person needs help or you're going to collaborate and you're going to help them write that counterclaim paragraph, you have the notes and you can help them and you can kind of guide them, or they can ask you questions, right? Because we're working in groups to make it a lot less difficult to write this essay because of the collaboration and the teamwork. When you're all done writing, just give me a little thumbs up on your desk so I can see about where everyone's at. I'm gonna give us about 1 more minute to kind of wrap up and make sure that we have the example that we need. And make sure too, when we're writing our notes, I know Mrs. Matthews has already covered this, but we don't need to have every single word. Even if you want to shorten my example, just so you understand the basic gist of it, that's perfectly fine. These notes are meant to help you. They're not copied down word for word to make sure that you're taking notes, right? It's just meant to help you and make sense for you. I'm going to click onto the next page. If we need to, we can come back to it, or you can borrow it from your partners in the group. So then this is notes just kind of relating to our rebuttal, which when I was looking back at the notes that we had taken, We did take notes on rebuttal, but I want you to have those same transitional phrases that help you when you're writing. Because a lot of times if we have the examples or we have the notes, or we have the notes but we don't have the examples, it can kind of hard for us to dive into writing and understand how to make it transition well. So, our rebuttal is evidence that disputes or disagrees with the counterclaim, which a lot of us just have really good practice with in that bell ringer. A lot of us might be champs at this, and this might be a little bit redundant, but again, this is to help you and make sure that you're prepared when you're writing your essay. So this should be directly related to your counterclaim. I want everyone to write down this line at least. Should be directly related to your counterclaim. Because in talking with Miss Mortimer and Mrs. Matthews, that is a common mistake that 7th graders make, or even just middle schoolers as a whole. If you're writing your rebuttal and you're not connecting it to your counterclaim, then what's the point of writing your rebuttal, right? You're bringing up the opposing side's stance or view, and you're using your rebuttal to argue or come back to that to strengthen your overall argument, right? So this is your comeback to ultimately strengthen your claim. And we've had a lot of practice with this doing our Would You Rather Wednesday bell ringers when all of us share, because we all are offering our opinions, and when we're having those discussions, we're saying, well, actually, I don't think that would be right. I think it would actually do this. And then by having us talk back and forth to each other, we're offering up our counterclaims and our rebuttals, right? And I don't want you to write down every single one of these again like the last slide. Just write down the ones that make sense to you or that you'll probably want to use in your essay that sound the best to you. So some transitional phrases are, however, this claim is not valid because, that being said, what this argument overlooks is, and while this is partially true, and my example that relates directly back to the counterclaim that I just made is, however, this claim is not valid because the women were tall and muscular, appearing to be men in disguises, and they quickly disappeared before the police could question them. This points to the conclusion that these were not family friends, but rather JW and Clarence paying respects to their mother. I would also kind of make a little note that even with this example, I probably should have put a page number with it, right? Because if I'm giving that specific and strong evidence, I want my reader of my essay to know that I got this directly from the book. The book says that the police officers were suspicious because the women that had the heavy makeup on, they were tall and muscular, right? So if I'm putting my page number in there, then that really strengthens my rebuttal, which strengthens my claim, right? Give me another little thumbs up when you're all ready to go to the next slide. Okay, I see 3 more pencils ready. About 30 more seconds. And I know we already started off with a little bit of practice with claims and counterclaims, but the next slide I have 2 examples of claims. And I want you in your groups, I'm gonna give you about 1 to 2 minutes, and I want you to talk about the claim, counterclaim, and rebuttal. And I want you to critique it in your small groups, and then we're gonna come back together and we're gonna have a discussion. So in your groups, I want you to be thinking, I'm gonna share, or I'm gonna be called on, or I want to share something. So let's talk in this group and let's get together and collaborate, and we're gonna find something that we can critique, or that we can improve, or maybe something that was done really well. Okay. So, example number 1, I have the claim, schools should start later to improve students' academic performance. The counterclaim is, some might argue that later start times would disrupt parents' work schedules and make it difficult for them to get their kids to school on time. The rebuttal is, however, later start times would increase students' mental health. So talk in your groups after I'm done reading these examples aloud, and you're gonna decide which one you're gonna respond to. Claim number 2 is energy drinks should not be in school vending machines. Your counterclaim for that is having energy drinks in schools could mean that less students are falling asleep during class. And the rebuttal for that is too much caffeine can lead to hyperactivity. So I'm gonna set a little timer. in your groups, I want everyone to be confident enough when you're critiquing this to be, or to feel comfortable enough to share. So I'm starting the timer, we have 1 or 2 minutes. You're just gonna point out maybe things that are really strong in the claim or counterclaim, or things that could be worked on in the counterclaim or rebuttal, going over our notes and everything that we just shared.
The second claim. Yeah, I feel like yeah, what I was going to say is like caffeine, like coffee, I drink coffee and it helps me. But like if I'm drinking energy drinks, I don't even like how they taste. But then it's like 2 cups of coffee at once and more sugary too. So that's terrible for developing brain health and can yeah, and so the rebuttal.
So it ended up actually being more.
Yeah, and also like the other thing is that like I feel like yeah, so that the counterclaim should be like that it'll help with the energies, but I feel like the rebuttal should be closer to that it's terrible for you even if it does have like as much caffeine as coffee.
Some people get tired.
It does help me stay awake, but like I don't think that it's so I drink coffee instead.
Let's take about 15 more seconds to wrap up those thoughts.
Well, also you're kind of
Okay, we're gonna wrap up those thoughts and we're gonna come back together as a class. Okay, for those that chose the first claim, counterclaim, and rebuttal, what was one critique that you had on this? Finn.
One critique that I had on it is that the rebuttal and claim are a little too short and don't have that much information, and the rebuttal doesn't have any citations and sources to find information about it can increase students' mental health.
Right, that's a good point. And like, our example on the board is very specific with our claim, right? So if it's saying school should start later to improve students' academic performance, that's not really giving us any idea how does it improve students' academic performance. Is it letting them improve their academic performance because they're getting to sleep in? Are they having enough time to eat breakfast in the morning? Things like that. So you're saying that the claim could be a little bit more specific and your rebuttal could also be a little bit more specific and show that evidence to strengthen the claim, right? I'm gonna ask Garrett's group to share what they put on that first one.
We said that the rebuttal doesn't really connect to the counterclaim because, the rebuttal helps prove your claim, but it doesn't really connect to the counterclaim because having your students' mental health be better isn't really going to help parents not being able to get them.
Right, so that's a really good point, and that's why I'm stressing this so much is in your writing, I want to make sure that your rebuttal directly relates to your counterclaim. Because if somebody's arguing this, like if this was a conversation between me and Mrs. Matthews or me and Miss Mortimer, if I bring up a rebuttal and say, hey, later start times would increase our students' mental health. After Mrs. Matthews just said, some might argue that later start times would disrupt parents' work schedules. She's gonna be like, okay, well you didn't even just try to counteract what I said, so that just makes me think that I'm right and that was a really strong point and you couldn't say anything back to it, right? So now you're just making up all these other things to try to strengthen your claim, but you're not shooting down my counterclaim, right? Does anyone have anything they want to add for that first example? Okay, second example. Vivian?
I thought that the counterclaim, it kind of it's not the biggest problem with energy drinks. Like it can cause a lot of health issues, and I feel like that's what the counterclaim and rebuttal should have been about. And it does relate, but the rebuttal has no evidence or anything. It just says something.
Right, so kind of like what Finn said, we need more specific evidence and reasoning with our rebuttal. Because if you said too much caffeine can lead to hyperactivity, people were probably gonna be like, okay, where's your study that proves that? Or where's your research that proves that, right? And I like that you pointed out that the counterclaim, it's not really the biggest thing that people would argue against that, right? If people said energy drinks should not be in school vending machines, do you think that's the strongest point that people would make to try to get them out?
causes a lot of health issues, and that it can actually like make learning harder because your brain's still developing and you're adding like 2 cups of coffee at a time.
Exactly. Okay, Maddie, we're gonna wrap up with your comment.
Me and Tiffany were saying how like energy drinks can have different effects on people. So like they can make some people like more tired, or like some people aren't affected by them.
Right, and that's like another good point. I've seen some research that shows that caffeine actually helps people with ADHD calm down. So it doesn't give them the energy, it helps them calm down, right? So Maddie's saying that the counterclaim needs to have more evidence with it as well, right? Okay, we're gonna transition into our group work for today. So we do still have our pacing guide within our group. So yesterday we were supposed to complete the claim as a group and introduction, because remember, claim, introduction, and conclusion are as a group. And we're supposed to start the ball rolling on paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, those were your jobs. Today, we're focusing on completing paragraph number 1 and completing paragraph number 2. This is also a really good time, especially because we just went over the lesson and we took notes, to create your counterclaim, rebuttal, and conclusion, and get rolling on that. Remember, conclusions are as a group, right? And then there is a little bit of a glimpse of what we're doing tomorrow. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns before we turn the time over to you guys in groups? Okay, the time is now yours.
Okay, so